itself.
Yes.
If it is an app. Is Zoom an app?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I can see you know a lot about this technology as usual.
So much. I could
Well,
reach out and fix anyone's computer.
Mhm.
well, thanks everyone for joining us. We're really excited today to be here with Diane 9 in conversation with Cindy Williams about the book My Life with Helen. And you can purchase a copy of that book, which we highly encourage, by going to the chat. I've posted a link there to politicsandprose.com. It's a great way to support our author and to also support your local independent bookstore. And also, I wanted to let everyone know that the latter portion of tonight's event is going to be devoted to your audience questions. So the way you do that is you can click on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can click on that box and type your questions in there. We also have a chat, but if you could try to keep all your questions to the Q&A, it just makes life a lot easier, and we would really appreciate that. So with that out of the way, it is my honor to introduce Diane 9. She is a Washington, D.C. based literary agent and attorney. She's also the author of Get Published, A Guide to Literary Tips, Traps, and Truth. Today, she'll be discussing her new book, My Life with Helen, which chronicles the life and career of Helen Thomas, the larger-than-life Dean of White House Press Corps, who covered more administrations than anyone in history. Diane was Helen's friend and literary agent, and she gives a behind-the-scene look at Helen's life, particularly at her very public fall from grace. Joining Diane in conversation tonight will be Cindy Williams, an actress known for her roles in American Graffiti, The Conversation, and Laverne and Shirley, and she is also the author of Shirley, I Jest. So without any further ado, here are Diane and Cindy.
Well, thank you, Tom.
Yes.
I'd also like to thank Politics and Prose for hosting this event. I remember attending in-person events often throughout Helen's very prolific writing career, so it's an honor for us to be here. I'd also like to thank my friends and clients and my parents for watching, though I did forbid my mother from asking a question. Silly me. Finally, I'd like to thank Cindy Williams for her participation tonight, and I feel like I'm like working up to being being a Laverne to her Shirley. I think I have a long way to go yet. Lastly, before we start, I'd like to give a shout out to Cindy's book, Shirley, I Jest.
Thank you, Diane.
Buy it, you will not regret it. Cindy, I'm all yours.
Well, I can say the same about My Life with Helen because it's such a fabulous read, Diane. I'm so proud of you. And I can remember watching Helen at the White House press conferences, and I was a theater arts major in college at the time, and I studied her body language because it was so dynamic. And I thought if I ever play a character, although I can't recall what character I have played or would ever play, as dynamic and iconic as Helen Thomas, those are the moves I'd like to make. She was just so marvelous all the way around, soup to nuts. But let's start with, well, you know Helen so well. And I'd like to start with the introduction. If you would read the introduction, because it gives such a fabulous background of Helen. So would you do that and read it?
I'd be happy to.
Right.
I need to put on my glasses to do so. Helen Thomas was the Dean of the White House Press Corps, and she was my friend and mentor. She was my Aunt Helen. During her adult life, I probably spent more time with Helen than anyone else. Helen Amelia Thomas was born in Winchester, Kentucky on August 4th, 1920. She was raised in Detroit, Michigan, where she attended public schools and later graduated from Wayne State University. The year after college, Helen served as a copy girl. She used to say she was a copy boy on the now defunct Washington Daily News, and joined United Press, later United Press International, in 1943. For 12 years, Helen had to be at work at 5:30 a.m. to write radio news for UPI, though the early hour never really changed much throughout her life. She was paid $24 a week for this privilege. She later had several beats around the federal government, including the Department of Justice, FBI, Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, the predecessor to the Department of Health and Human Services, and Capitol Hill, before she began covering President-elect John F. Kennedy in 1960. Before JFK became president, Helen encountered the young, handsome senator at a party they were both attending. Because Helen never learned to drive, Senator Kennedy offered her a ride home. She accepted, but thought he was, quote, boring and not especially attractive at the time. Helen didn't realize she would later cover this, quote, boring man when he became president. Helen went to the White House in January 1961 as a member of the UPI team headed by the late Merriman Smith, and was there until May of 2000. In July of 2000, Thomas became a columnist for the Hearst News Service after quitting UPI when it was purchased by News World Communications, Inc., which publishes the Washington Times and was founded by the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the leader of the Unification Church, otherwise known as the Moonies. During the years she covered Kennedy, Helen was the first woman to close a presidential news conference with a traditional, "Thank you, Mr. President." And she always wore 2 watches to be sure she could end the press conferences on time. Helen also revised her view of the young commander-in-chief, finding him, quote, inspiring as a president. A woman of many firsts, Helen served as the president of the Women's National Press Club in 1959 to 60, and she was the first female officer of the National Press Club after it opened its doors to women members for the first time in 90 years. In addition, Thomas became the first woman officer of the White House Correspondents Association in its 50 years of existence, and served as its first female president in 1975 to 76. Helen also became the first woman member of the exclusive journalist club, the Gridiron, in its history, and the first woman to be elected its president in 1993. Helen Thomas traveled around the world several times with Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, and Clinton, and covered every economic summit. In February 1972, she was the only newspaper woman to travel with President Nixon to China during his breakthrough trip. Helen continued her pointed questioning of presidents throughout the Obama administration as a columnist for Hearst until her career ending unfortunate words about Jewish people. I was Helen's agent for years, and in an era where media personalities often replaced journalism with celebrity, Helen always understood the importance of the story before celebrity. Known worldwide for her tough questioning of presidents, one time when I was with Helen, Al Newharth, founder of USA Today, told a story about when he went to Cuba and he met with Fidel Castro. They were comparing their, quote, democracies in their respective countries. Al Newharth finally asked Castro what he considered the biggest difference between their democracies. Castro's reply, "I don't have to answer to Helen Thomas." Helen had a glorious sense of humor, was a rock-solid reporter, and worked as hard or harder than anybody I've ever known. Once when I asked her why she kept such a crazy schedule, she said, "I don't want to miss anything." Helen was also known for a ridiculous sense of punctuality. She set 2 or 3 alarm clocks every morning so she was sure to wake up on time. If anyone ever traveled with her, you knew to expect to be at the airport 3 hours earlier than necessary. Or if you attended the theater with her, she loved musicals, you only had to arrive an hour before the play began. And of course, she loved singing songs from musicals, which the Gridiron Club allowed her to perform every March at their annual white tie dinner. She spent weeks rehearsing around family and friends whenever the opportunity presented itself. Helen's family and friends were among the most important people in her life. She cherished her large family. She also enjoyed her group of closest friends, whom I always referred to as the ladies, a group of remarkable women who met when they were young and had dinner every weekend for the rest of Helen's life. They often dined at Mama Aisha's restaurant, Helen's home away from home. In fact, Aisha and her family became part of Helen's family too. I have many fond memories of time spent with Helen and the ladies at Helen's rather rustic cabin in the Shenandoah Valley that was built by her late husband, Doug Cornell. I guess none of us were all that outdoorsy, since the highlight of our trips to the cabin were always focused on eating dinner at the Inn at Little Washington, a highly rated restaurant near the cabin. Because you couldn't drink the water at the cabin when the water was even working, some of us would bring our toothbrushes to dinner and brush our teeth at the bathroom at the inn. And then there were New Year's Eve celebrations with Helen and the ladies. They were sleepovers, and we often wore matching pajamas. Helen never forgot her roots in her hometown of Detroit, where she grew up. She was never a sports fan, but she sure could get excited if the Detroit Tigers made the World Series. And she loved the hot dogs from Detroit so much that she would have people traveling from Detroit bring them to her in Washington. In fact, Helen loved hot dogs generally. When Helen was working on one of her many books, a journalist friend came from California to help her with the project. I received a call from the frustrated friend one day, bemoaning the fact that Helen wanted to socialize all the time instead of working on the book. I talked to Helen and she promised to get down to work. The next day, I received another call from Helen's friend. Apparently, Helen said they were going to have one last dinner before they got to work on the book. When asked who the dinner was with, Helen said, "The woman who runs the hot dog stand at the airport." Typical Helen, always balancing a crazy work schedule with fun. Helen helped a lot of people along the way, both emotionally and financially. In her words, you have to care about the poor, the sick, and the less fortunate. Helen loved life. She loved clothes, particularly clothes with a leopard print. She loved good food and good cognac. She loved a good political debate and loved the fact that she enjoyed a career at the center of politics. But most of all, she loved people. One of the few things Helen did not love were cats, but she put up with my various cats over the years, even when they chose her lap over a room full of cat lovers. One time in her older years, Helen answered some written questions from a magazine piece. One of the questions asked, "What was your greatest accomplishment?" Helen's answer, "Staying alive." I hope that Helen's memory will stay alive for all of us. I will convey some advice Helen gave as the commencement speaker to my own high school graduating class in 1980, because I think it sums up how Helen lived her life. Each day can be an adventure. Leave the prosaic and pragmatic to others. Dream dreams of things that never were, and ask, why not?
Wow. Wow.
Cindy, I'm all yours.
What a lady. Now you were her agent, her book agent, but you have a history with Helen. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? How you know?
Yeah, I actually knew Helen my entire life. My grandmother, whom I called me Mama, and Helen's sister, Isabel, whom they always called Izzy, were college roommates. They were nurses. Um, it was not always an easy relationship, though they were the closest of friends. They were sort of like the odd couple. My grandmother was a little on the wilder side, and Helen's sister was very prim and proper and followed the rules. So I remember one story they used to tell about when they were in nursing school together. Apparently in the dorms, there were these magazines in those days called True Love. And I guess that they were
Ooh.
illegal because they were considered so scandalous at the time.
They were illegal?
Yes.
It's all right.
And so the head nursing teacher was a woman by the name of Sister Emma. And Sister Emma always had it out for my grandmother, though it sounds like my grandmother did deserve it some of the time. But at any rate, one day, me Mama was tipped off that Sister Emma was going to be looking for True Love magazines in people's dorm rooms. And of course, me Mama was rooming with Izzy, Helen's sister. And so when me Mama got tipped off, she ran back to their room and, got her magazines and put them under Izzy's mattress. And so eventually, I guess Sister Emma came through doing a room check and found the magazines. So unbeknownst to Izzy that the room check had already occurred, later on, Izzy ran into me Mama on their rounds and she said, Sister Emma is going to be doing a room check looking for those magazines you read. And my grandmother said, with a smile on your face, no problem, I took care of it. And Izzy said, what did you do with them? And me Mama told her, I put them under your mattress. And Izzy was beside herself. And me Mama assured her that it was not going to be an issue because nobody would ever think Izzy would ever read such a thing. And later on, by the way, Sister Emma told my grandmother, I know those magazines were yours, but I can't prove it.
Well, that's a little Laverne and Shirley.
Yes, it was. I think pretty much what solidified me Mama's relationship with the entire Thomas family was one Christmas, my grandmother couldn't afford to go home, and the Thomas family lived closer to the school that they were attending. So me Mama actually spent Christmas with the Thomas family. And the Thomas family wasn't wealthy by any means. So everybody in the family had made something else for the others for Christmas. And so they even had a gift for my grandmother. In fact, it was the only thing that my mom and her brother were never allowed to touch as children. It was some type of a handkerchief with crocheted lace around it. But what I think was most interesting was Helen's gift to the group was to sing a song, My Man. And she sang it sort of like a burlesque singer. And, she was the kid sister of my grandmother's friend Izzy. And so when she was finished singing, my grandmother asked her, so do you want to be a singer when you get older? And Helen said, no. I'm going to be a reporter, and I'm going to be the best reporter this country has ever seen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did Helen have a good voice? Singing voice?
Yes and no. It was not Broadway material, but she could carry a tune.
She could sing good and loud.
Right.
Now, Diane, how many presidents did Helen cover? And if you could tell us, who was her favorite president?
She covered every president from JFK through Obama. And she always said that JFK was her absolute favorite, despite her earlier opinion of him. She did think he was inspired. She said he thought we could send a man to the moon. Nobody had ever heard of this before. And people thought he was crazy. And she added, we did it, but Kennedy obviously did not live to see it.
Right.
Helen, I think, also like Kennedy's humanity. For instance, when the press asked Kennedy when John was born, if Kennedy wanted John to grow up to be president too, Kennedy replied by saying, no, I just want him to be healthy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Now I know you've told me that Helen had a particular fondness for telling stories about LBJ.
Yeah.
Tell us one.
Well, so Helen always said that LBJ was bigger than life.
Right.
So one of my favorite stories is about the time that LBJ was handed a speech to give by his speechwriters. And LBJ looked at the speech, studied it for a while. Then he looked up and he said to the group standing there, Voltaire? The people I'm going to speak to don't know Voltaire. So he took a pen, scratched out Voltaire, and he wrote in, as my dear old daddy used to say.
Instead of as Voltaire can be
Yeah,
quoted.
exactly. Another one of my favorite stories was when LBJ was taken to Walter Reed to have his gallbladder removed. The psych ward was turned into a press room. And so when LBJ was asked, what did they do with the patients? He replied, we gave them all press passes.
That's
and my final anecdote about LBJ, which more directly involved Helen, was the time that Helen was invited to the family quarters to dine with LBJ at his, up in the White House family quarters. And also attending the dinner was Bill Moyers, who was LBJ's press secretary, and who also happened to be an ordained minister. So LBJ asked Bill Moyers to say a prayer before dinner. So Moyers began praying, and then LBJ said, speak up, Bill, I can't hear you. To which Moyers replied, I'm not talking to you, Mr. President.
Love that. Oh, I love that. What about, well, she must have had other anecdotes that you were in on that she told you, like from other administrations or other people she covered.
Yeah, she obviously had stories about every president that she covered. I could go on and on for hours with just her stories about presidents.
Tell the one about Miss Lillian.
Okay, so yeah, my favorites were Carter, because that was my introduction to Washington. I interned for Carter. And so before I get into Miss Lillian, Carter's mother, who was like really a character, my favorite story about Helen one time interacting with Carter was Carter was going to teach a Sunday school in class in church. And, Helen was there to cover it. And somebody at the church said, you're not allowed in. There's no ladies allowed here. So Helen said, I'm no lady, I'm a reporter. And they let her in. But yeah, you're right. Miss Lillian, who was Jimmy Carter's mother, was a character.
How old was she? Diane, how old was she? She was really
she was definitely older by the time Carter was president. Right. I can't recall exactly how old she was, but I mean, still good, both physically and mentally.
Another great character study.
And so my favorite story about Miss Lillian was one time when Helen had a one-on-one interview with Miss Lillian. And so, Helen saw that there was another reporter still in the room. So Helen stopped in the hallway outside the room, and an aide said, no, she's done, go on in. So Helen stood in the doorway for a while and overheard the end of the interview. It turns out the interview was with this French reporter. And so I guess the French reporter was berating Miss Lillian. Well, do you ever tell a lie, even a little white lie? And so finally, in exasperation, Miss Lillian said, well, I might tell a little white lie every now and then. For instance, do you remember when you walked through that doorway and I told you how beautiful you looked? Well, that was a little white lie.
Right.
And I thought one of Miss Lillian's classic comments ever was she was talking one time to Helen, and Helen was asking her about her children, and Miss Lillian all of a sudden said, sometimes when I look at my children, I wish I had remained a virgin.
Boy, she was something else. I remember her so vividly. Thank you for that. Now, Helen had her own best friends, her own circle of friends, which you call the ladies. You
Yes.
dubbed them the ladies. And they tell us a story about when they would attend a movie.
Well, okay, to back up, so I did dub Helen's closest friends the ladies. They were a group of remarkable women, but somewhat eccentric. These women included Fran Lewin, who actually was Helen's competitor at the White House in her early days. Fran worked for AP and Helen worked for UPI at the time. And the wire services in those days were extremely competitive. And I love a story early on when they knew each other. On the day that JFK was killed, both of their bosses were in Dallas to cover the story. So I guess, it's the old thing, when the cat's away, the mice will play. So Helen and Fran went around the corner to this, at that time, well-known French restaurant to basically have a 3-martini lunch. And while they were drinking these martinis, the maitre d' came up to them and he said, I was just in the bar where there's a TV on, and I think the president might have been shot. Oh my God, they jumped out of their chairs, I guess, left the restaurant without even paying, ran back to the White House because, it was which one could get it first, AP or UPI. Helen got the story. And then Helen actually got sent to Andrews Air Force Base. And she was there to see Jackie arrive in her bloodied clothes, which I think Fran was upset about for the rest of their lives.
Sure.
But anyway, the group also included these sisters, Gloria Oliger and Dorothy Oliger. Gloria was, she worked on Capitol Hill for a while for a member of Congress. And then she was a reporter for primarily women's magazines. And her sister Dorothy, whom we refer to as Dorothy O, because there were 2 Dorothys in this group. Dorothy O was a secretary for UPI where Helen worked, but Dorothy O was obsessed with sex. She could turn any conversation into a conversation about sex, which used to make Helen annoyed, and she'd constantly be saying, Dorothy. But at any rate, they were still friends. So the last member of the group was a woman by the name of Dorothy Newman, who sold real estate, embassies, and things. Dorothy was a remarkable woman because she was the real estate broker who sold the Chinese embassy to the Chinese government after Nixon opened relations. And that was what really put her on the map, because women in those days just didn't do those types of transactions in real estate. But you specifically asked about going to the movies with this group. it was always an experience because they talk nonstop, no matter how full the theater was or how empty the theater was. So one of my favorites was a time when we all went to see A Room with a View. So from long ago, obviously. In A Room with a View, there's a very brief scene where there's male frontal nudity. I wouldn't have even noticed it.
I missed it.
Had it not been for Helen and the ladies. All of a sudden, when this comes on the screen, Helen shouts out like she was at a football game or something, "Their penises are showing," as I slunk down in my seat. And all the other ladies had to continue talking about these poor men's genitalia at the top of their lungs. But I got through it somehow. Then my other favorite movie that I saw with them was when I went to see Oliver Stone's movie Nixon. Well, for whatever reason, Helen did not think the portrayal of Pat Nixon was accurate. And so she proceeded to shout out things. Oh, that's not how Pat Nixon acted. Oh, that's not Pat Nixon. Give me a break. And the other ladies had to chime in again. Dorothy was literally clapping her hands and saying, "Go, you go, Helen, you go." And, again, I was slinking down in my seat to the point where when we were walking out of the movie after it was all over, just these people that had seen the movie and were walking out at the same time, a group looked over at us and one of them said, "Oh, I thought I heard you talking, Helen." So yeah, it was always an experience, but I love the ladies and I miss them dearly.
I would have paid to go to a movie with Helen. I would have paid Helen to go to a movie with Helen. Now, just switching it around here a little bit. I know this was difficult for you as her agent, but you did resign as her agent, and tell us a little bit. I'm sure it was very difficult for you, Diane.
It was the most difficult decision I've ever made in my entire life to this day.
Right.
Essentially what happened was I was having a new computer system installed the day that I found out about this. So I had not been on the internet all day. I was primarily talking on the phone. When I eventually got a call from Helen's boss, by this time she was working at Hearst. And, I didn't think anything of it initially because her boss called me often. But I did begin to get the idea that something was up when he said, "We're about to fire Helen, but we think she deserves representation. So how quickly can you get down here to our offices?" And, I couldn't believe that I'd heard correctly. So I said, "What?" And he said, "Yes, we're about to fire her." And I was like, "Why?" And he said, "Oh, you don't know?" And I said, "No, what?" And then he said, "Well, we can play the audio for you, but you really should look on the internet." And then he began to play the audio. The audio, which I later learned was an exchange that took place between Helen and a rabbi. Helen had finished covering an event at the White House celebrating Jewish Heritage Month. And when she was walking out of the driveway at the same time, this man who turns out to have been a rabbi and his son and his son's friend yelled over to Helen on the driveway. And it started off well enough. The rabbi simply said, "These two young people are budding journalists. Do you have any advice for them?" So Helen was really good about things like that. And she went over and talked to the kids for a while. Meantime, the rabbi had a flip cam. So almost as a throwaway question toward the end of this encounter, the rabbi said, "What about Israel?" And Helen said, "What about Israel?" And he said, well, any words about Israel? And Helen ended up essentially saying, Jews should go home.
Oh.
And the rabbi, if you see the video, looks sort of aghast. And he said, where should the Jews go? And Helen said, Germany, Poland, America, wherever. So I heard this over the phone with Helen's boss. And after I picked my job off from the ground, I, said, could I have some time to speak to my client, putting on my agent's hat at the time. So long story short, I called Helen and I could tell she was upset and had been crying. And, so I just came out with it and I said, I guess you're in big trouble and your job is in jeopardy. And she, through her tears said, I know. So we talked for a while. And in the end, I thought she needed to clarify what she had said or what she meant by what she was saying. I even had some suggestions as to how she might go about that. But in the end, she dug her heels in and refused, and ultimately hung up on me. And this ultimately resulted in her losing her job. But meantime, both of us were getting death threats. I had so many emails that the guy that was installing my computer that day, he kept yelling out of my office, you're getting a lot of emails. And well, I always get a lot of emails, so I didn't think anything about it. But when I finally looked at it, it was thousands and thousands and thousands of emails. And at the same time, after the story broke, my phone line started ringing nonstop. And, I was worried about Helen's hateful remarks, certainly, but I was also worried about her on a personal level. So I tried calling her and I talked to her boss several times in between. But, Helen, this is how she was when she got very upset. There was no reasoning with her. And given that she would not take my advice, nor would she, clarify or apologize for her remarks. And in addition, the death threats kept coming on in, aimed at me. I felt I had no choice except to resign as her agent. Like I said, it was the most difficult decision I've ever made in my entire life because Helen was like a family member to me.
Right.
But I also played a professional role in her life, and that was as her agent. And so ultimately, because she stopped talking to me and wouldn't even answer the phone when I called her, I wrote her a letter, and I ended up, by then we were living in the same condo building, but I had lived with her throughout all those internships I did early on in my life in Washington. But by then I had my own place. And so because she wouldn't talk to me or, see me, I wrote her a letter and I taped it to her door in our building. And ultimately she got it. But, as hard as it was, I still think that I somehow did the right thing.
Well, I think you had no choice. I mean, you were really between a rock and a hard place there.
Yeah.
That's a tough thing, personally knowing her as well as you did and as long as you did. And then, as you said, the professional level, and then receiving death threats. I mean, what would any of us have done? But had she ever done anything like that before? I mean, wasn't she was pretty much she was verbose and loud and, dynamic like that. But she was always, I thought, diplomatic in her own, tour de force way.
Yeah, I mean, she occasionally would ask a pointed question of presidents at those news conferences about the Middle East. She was of Lebanese descent.
Right.
So
to know.
But she was born in the US. But you know, was she was worried that the Arabs were never being treated right. And
But she
anybody who knew her personally, on a personal level, she was very pro-Arab, but she was not necessarily anti-Israeli, if that makes any sense.
total sense, total sense. Well, well, did you ever see her again? Or she took umbrage to you resigning, right? As her
Right. So yeah, she and most of her very large family, whom I also considered my family,
right.
completely stopped talking to me. And like I mentioned, Helen lost her job over this. But meantime, so she wasn't talking to me. Most of her family members weren't talking to me. The death threats kept coming in. Oh, and I had like millions of media requests, which I didn't do any of them.
Right.
I think I did one. It was a high school friend who was hosting a local radio show, and I knew he'd be kind to me.
How do
But
you
that,
use something like that unless she apologized or you took your advice in the beginning?
right. You know, so, but you know, all these requests kept coming in for me. And oh, and there were picketers outside. We still lived in the same condo building. There were picketers outside on the street. And, you know, I missed Helen, you know, because she usually was a part of my day-to-day life.
Right.
So I guess the stress was getting to me. So I eventually had a major stroke,
You know.
where I had to learn to walk and talk again. And I guess when you live in the same condo building and you're taken out on a stretcher through the lobby of the building, it becomes building gossip. So Helen found out about my stroke, and she reached out to me while I was in the hospital. And that was really the only good thing that came out of my stroke. But you know, we became friends again. And when I was eventually discharged from the hospital, still, you know, very weak and, you know, but talking and walking sort of. Helen was actually my first visitor, other than the friend that brought me home from the hospital. And that same friend cooked dinner for us, and Helen came to dinner that night. And you know, it was interesting because what had broken off our long-term friendship was basically never discussed. And I will admit it just seemed easier that way, to just, and by then Helen was not in good health herself either. So in the end, I was with Helen on the day she died. She had hospice care at home.
Oh, so it must have been, I mean, it must have been a joy, a double-edged sword for you to write the book, you know, a joy and difficult also, was it?
Yeah, I mean, it was emotional. But then I figured out that I had to take the advice that I always give to my clients, put the emotion aside and organize the book. So, you know, I started with a broad outline and, you know, started to fill in details, group things together that I thought belonged together. And, you know, then the writing actually came easily.
Plus you have all those wonderful anecdotes and stories about her because as we both said, she was bigger than life and it's
Right.
always, you know, and it shows on the page in the book. It's a fantastic read. Um, well, you know, in the end, someone like that always leaves you with something, and you were so close to her on so many different levels. So, what could you say she left you with or taught you? And I
Oh,
mean,
so many things. Um, she taught me that most politicians have their heart in the right place, but some still fall short. She taught me about the importance of staying informed because our government's policies ultimately impact not only all of us in this country, but people worldwide.
that's right.
And she also taught me the importance of free press in a democratic system. She always used to say that because we don't have a parliamentary system, the media, those press conferences, are the only forum by which our president can be questioned. But my biggest takeaway was actually when Helen used to tell me constantly, if a door is closed, walk through it anyway.
I love that. I love that. And she was also a very charitable person. I know you've told me that. And it was always about the importance of helping the poor and less fortunate in the world. And so because of that, she was just a magnanimous, fabulous figure. So what do you think Helen's legacy will be? I mean, after all of this, I mean, when history writes about her and Meryl Streep plays her, the movie version of the book, what do you think her legacy?
When you play her.
Oh yes, because I did study her moves. But what do you think that, you know, that tone that she left us with? Because
well, you know, I hope that at least part of her legacy will be her many firsts as a female journalist, which I believe not only helped future female journalists, but women in general break down some of the barriers. But I think Helen probably would want to be remembered most for her tough questioning of presidents. She used to say that she only wanted one word on her tombstone, and that word is why.
wow. Wow.
So should we take some questions now?
Sure. Let me see if I can figure this out up here. Tom, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, can you put the, oh, here we go, the Q&A. It's not coming up on my screen. Can you take the questions and give it to Diane?
Absolutely. Okay, we have a lot of good questions here. This one's from Stephen. He says, was Helen's unfortunate comments about Jews or about Israelis, there is a big difference? I have a sense that there's a huge double standard. People say about Palestinian families, the equivalent of what Helen said about Jews, or a lot worse with no repercussions.
If I'm understanding the question correctly, and obviously I'm not Helen, so I'm, you know, speculating as to what she might have said. I think that she was not an anti-Semite, but she did object to some of the Israeli policies as they impacted the Arab community. Does that answer the question?
I think so. This one's from Kathy. She says she thoroughly enjoyed your book. There's literally a compelling story on every page.
Thank you.
She wants to know if you would have become a journalist if not for Helen Thomas. What do you think Helen would think of 21st century journalism?
Well, first of all, was part of the question if I would become a journalist?
Yeah.
You know, so oddly enough, or maybe, you know, due to Helen, who knows, I was a double major in undergrad and one of my majors was journalism. But I think that Helen did not like the way journalism was changing, even when she was alive. She basically said that if you're going to have an opinion and you broadcast something or write something, it should be labeled as an opinion. So I don't think she was fond of the idea of, you know, like things like MSNBC or Fox News, because she felt those were not real journalism. It was, you know, commentary.
So Susan asks, what do you think Helen would think of the current political situation and administration?
Well, I don't know what aspect you mean, but I think she'd be very upset by the pandemic, as we all are. And I also think that she would not have appreciated some of the way President Trump is treating the press. I actually wrote an op-ed on this topic for USA Today in the interest of full disclosure. But I do think that, Helen would not have taken it from Trump. Or any other president. And she did not take it from any of the presidents that she covered. I do remember one time when she was unhappy with the George W. Bush administration. And she made an off-the-cuff remark at a social setting where she didn't realize she was on the record, and somebody wrote it and it went viral. Her comment in this private setting was, George W. Bush is the worst president in history. And, she got moved to the back of the room at press conferences in the briefing room. And, Helen wore it with a badge of honor. They can move me to the back of the room, but they can't close my mouth. So I think it would be the same thing, now. The world has changed a lot in a very short period of time. And who knows what Helen would have thought, but I'm pretty sure that, she would have adapted, to the changes. I think I would have been worried sick about her because she would have still wanted to be at the White House practically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I would be worried about her contracting coronavirus. So
I would have loved to have heard some of those exchanges between her and President Trump. Love to hear it.
Yeah.
That would have been fun. Are there any other questions?
There are. This one's from M. Morris. He wants to know if you think that if Helen's age played a role in her comments in 2010, as well as her inability to find a way to respond to your constructive feedback.
I do. I had felt, because she had a major health issue a couple of years before her regrettable remarks. And she was never in exactly good health since her health issues. And, the story broke 2 weeks after it occurred. So by the time the story broke, Helen was on kidney dialysis. And a friend of mine who's an MD told me that sometimes kidney failure can mimic almost some type of dementia. And people often blurt out things that they wouldn't have normally said. I'd like to think that's what happened in this case, but I'll never know.
Yvonne asks, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, it was pretty much every time, somebody found out that I even knew Helen, they would be like, oh my gosh, what would she like? And then by the time I was done, having a conversation with them, they would say, you should write a book. I finally decided to do it. But I do still work full time as a literary agent. So, it was hard to find time. So it took me a while to buckle down and get to it. But once I did, the writing came fairly easily. So.
Carol asks, how do you think Helen's devastating comment would be taken in today's political climate?
I don't know. I think it was more about not the thought of what she was trying to convey, but of how she conveyed that thought. Nobody's, unless you're so hardened, nobody's gonna say that telling Jews to go home to places where they were burned and killed, nobody probably would think that was acceptable. But there are some people, and I think it's becoming an increasing number of people worldwide, who are more and more seeing the Arab point of view. And, I don't think that, personally, I don't think that you have to choose one or the other. You're not just, seeing the Israeli side or the Arab side. You can see both points of view, and hopefully peace will come one day to the Middle East.
Right.
So we have one last question, and it's for both of you, actually. This person wants to know what it was like for each of you to write your books.
Cindy?
Well, with Diane holding the hammer over my head, it was scary because I'm not a very organized person, and I wanted to do it myself with the help of fabulous Dave Smitherman. But in fact, I started it and I woke up one night or early in the morning, and I just said, I can't do this. I can't do this. And I had all the cards laid out of the chapters and and I had outlined the chapters, and I called David Smitherman and I said, I hate where my book starts. I hate where it starts. What am I going to do? And he said, you're up early, because he was on the East Coast. And he said, well, if you hate where the book begins, if you don't like where the book begins, he said, begin it somewhere else. And that was it. And he just gave me that clue, and I rearranged the cards, and then it was smooth sailing. And I had a lot of fun writing it. I could go on and on about it. And if it weren't for this lady right here, I never would have finished it, but she's very strict. And I had a lot of fun. And
like a school teacher with a ruler.
You were like a school marm. And I asked her for 2 days. I said, I need 2 more days. She said, nope, 12 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. That's it. It's into the publisher.
And are you glad?
I'm very happy. I'm going to write a play about it now.
Good.
8-hour day. Anyway, it was a fabulous experience, and I would suggest it for anyone. Who has a book in them, write it. It's a lot of fun.
I agree.
Diane?
I too enjoyed writing my book, and I did not have anybody with a ruler cracking down on me, so I had to crack down on myself.
That's right, but you're very disciplined and organized, and I'm not. But I wish I'd known when you were writing this book, because I would have called you every day. How many pages? Do a page count.
Yeah, that was one benefit. I did not mention that I was writing this book until it was basically done. 10-1.
And I'm sure there was a reason for that, Diane.
Yes.
So we wouldn't be down your throat.
Well,
okay, well.
Thank you so much for this discussion. This was really wonderful, and there are a lot of great stories. I think we all had a really great time listening. Before we sign off, I just wanted to ask each of you, what are you guys reading right now?
Well, I am reading, in this day and age, the Bible. And and I also, my guilty pleasure, Mary Higgins Clark, her last mystery, You Don't Own Me. Sorry, but I love that. And the Bible.
And I just started reading.
And of course, My Life with Helen.
Oh, thank you, Cindy.
Fabulous. Fabulous.
And, I have very little time for pleasure reading because of what I do for a living, because I'm always reading things that I hope I'm going to be able to turn into something that other people can read. But I just started reading John Grisham's book, Camino Winds, which my mom sent to me.
I love John Grisham.
Me too.
Well, excellent. Well, thank you both so much for this excellent conversation. And thank you to everyone for watching. And we will see you again next time on Politics and Prose Live.
Thank you.